But yeah, so we came back from Montana, moved back into the trailer, and I think that's when a lot of the issues really started happening between you and Rick.
Yeah.
And
when I was working at the hospital.
And
because he'd have been 13 about 1980.
yeah.
Mhm. That's when he. Well, first of all, he came home and told me that he saw kids with knives at Walker Junior High, and that scared the dickens out of me. And he started lying to me and doing things that he wasn't supposed to, so they knocked down, drag out fights, so took him up to live with David for 6 months. 6 months later, he calls me and he says, I want to come home, but I don't want to come to Bismarck. I want you to move here. So I talked to David. David said, you get an FHA house, everybody else is. So I went and filled out the papers. And next thing I know, we're moving up and staying with David while the house is being built. That went really fast.
Yeah. I remember you telling me we were going to move up there. I remember asking you why. At the time, you told me that you were afraid, because I'd started hanging out with Donald, who had been a friend of Rick's.
That was not good either.
And, of course, that, there was... So I was starting to get in some trouble, and so you told me that you were afraid, that I was going to get in too much trouble if we stayed in Bismarck. So...
Well, didn't you know that Rick had called me and said that he wanted
you may have told me that back then, but I don't remember it. So I just remember asking you why we had to move up there, because I didn't really want to leave Bismarck. And but I remember I was in 6th grade at that time, and probably when we first discussed moving up there, and somebody told me, well, the 6th graders up there go to the junior high building. So I figured, well, I'd be in junior high if I go up there. So I thought that was pretty cool. But we didn't actually go up there till I was we moved up there the summer before I went into 7th grade. So, but I remember, because you didn't want me to go to Wachter either.
No.
For the kind of the same reason you talked about earlier with Rick. So, and and I was hanging around with bad influences, and I was getting in trouble. But moving up to Hazen didn't change that. I found new bad influences and new trouble up there. So, but
well, I'm glad I didn't know about the things you guys did, because I would have been a basket case.
Yeah. So we move up to Hazen, and that summer...
Stayed with David.
Yeah, the summer of '81, while our house was being built, we stayed with David for a while. Rick had been working at David's pizza place, and I started working there too.
And we started church at Stanton Assembly of God.
I don't remember... I know that before we left Bismarck, you had started visiting Bethel Assembly. But actually, I also remember way back when I was much younger and this was probably during your period where you were visiting various churches, visiting Evangel Temple at times.
Yeah.
But I remember before we left Bismarck, you had started going to Bethel Assembly at times, and because I remember you taking me, and it was such a different experience from any church I'd ever been to, so it left an impression. But It's funny because I remember up in Hazen that we went to the Methodist church up there for a while.
Well, we probably did for a while.
And
but
so I'm not sure if that's when we first went up there or when that was. But I know we eventually ended up out at the Stanton assemblies.
right.
So, but walk me through a little bit what you felt about moving up to Hazen at that.
I was thrilled because I was going to have my own house, a brand new house. Oh my gosh. It didn't have my dad attached to it. My name would be on it. I'll never forget, in 1980 is when they found out that he had Alzheimer's disease. And after we moved into the house up there, they'd come up to visit. And my dad would say, "This is my house."
Yeah.
Because and I was just beside myself, but I had to realize it was part of his disease. My mother talked to me about it and said, he thinks this is his house.
Yeah, I remember you and him getting into a shouting match with each other. And, because, he came up and he was doing some work on some things, and I don't know, you guys got into an argument over something, and I remember him saying, "Well, this is my place," and you just yelled, "No, it's not." And, yeah. But that did happen around the same time that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or at least that started. I remember initially, when his memory problems started, I remember initially there being talk about, not Alzheimer's right away. I think it took him a while to figure that out. He talked about hardening of the arteries or something like that maybe
Well, I
was
think
causing his
Alzheimer's
problems.
was a new disease at that time.
And
Mom said he got lost taking her to work at the clinic one day and scared the heck out of him.
yeah. How did you, if you can remember that time, how did you feel about learning that this was happening to your dad?
Well, at that time it was such a new disease, I had no idea what it was going to turn out to be like. How he was going to end up or anything. I just knew he had a disease that affected his memory, and it's hard to remember because we were living in Hazen. I wasn't exposed to them like I was when we were in Bismarck all the time.
Yeah.
I had a regular income at the hospital and not hopping from job to job, and it was so different once I became a Christian. When I became a Christian, I was always witnessing to my family and stuff, telling them they needed the Lord, and they'd tell me, "No, we have our own religion," and but definitely changed me. But I know we still had, and I still had fights. But it's not something I'm proud of. But it made a difference being not in Bismarck where they were. It helped me to, I don't know, be more independent or something. And I think it made a big difference.
Yeah. So we moved up to Hazen, got into our own house, and you started working at the hospital up there. How did you feel about moving to a small town and working at a small town hospital as compared to what you were?
I loved it.
Yeah.
Pat Oz moved up there at the exact same time I did. I thought that was so weird because she was working at Bismarck Hospital and I didn't know her. And she moved up to Hazen and started working there the same time I did. And of course her folks were from there and had a farm south of town, and so we got to be friends by working there together. I just felt like that was a God-ordained relationship because we both came from Bismarck Hospital and Bismarck at the same time. But we clashed a lot too because she was a Seventh-day Adventist and I was always quoting the Bible, and a lot of things that they teach, weren't biblical and stuff, and so we clashed in that way. But basically, we were good friends for a long time. Yeah, and then I'll never forget the time we changed cars many times over the years. I don't know whatever happened to the yellow Dodge that Randy Roberson gave us, but
Well, Rick ended up with it.
Oh, did he take that?
After he got his license, because we had several.
Well, I know
Johnny
gave us a pale yellow
Pontiac, but he also gave us the 70 Monte Carlo we had.
Oh, did
so he gave us 2 vehicles.
Oh, I didn't remember that. But I remember the yellow Pontiac was in tough shape when we were living up in Hazen.
Yeah.
It was making awful noises, and I was going to the church one day to talk to the pastor about something unrelated, and all the men were on top of the roof of the church replacing the roof, and they heard me come up to the church, chug 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 chug. I know that car sounded so bad. And talked to the pastor, and then I left. And a couple days later, they called me and said, "We want to come over, and we got something for you." And here they brought me this Oldsmobile that this family had donated to the church. And after hearing my car that day, they realized I was the one who needed it. So I don't know what we did with the yellow Pontiac, but we had a...
I don't remember what we did with the Pontiac or the Monte Carlo. I remember hoping that I would end up with the Monte Carlo because I really liked it. And I think I told you this one time, but I used to actually, you had a spare set of keys for that, and you had it parked for a long time. I used to take it and go out driving with it and bring it back.
No, I
park it in
know
its spot. long before I ever had a driver's license.
Maybe you told me that before, but I don't remember that. Woo.
But,
I guess up in a small town like Hazen, you can get away with that.
But when I did eventually get my license, I'm the one who ended up with the 73 Oldsmobile that the church donated to us.
The brown one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah, we had so many cars. It's hard to remember, what happened to them all, but most of them were donated.
Yeah.
People were very kind, and the Lord was looking out for us. That's for sure.
Well, and really, to me, that was part of the experience of being a Christian. I mean, that's one of the things that really, as I was growing up, left a huge impression on me, as I was constantly seeing these Christian people, be charitable to us and taking care of us and being kind to us. And, I didn't see that from other people. So seeing that consistently coming from Christian people left a big impression on me.
Yeah.
So,
me too.
But
it's all part of building your faith and trust in the Lord when people come through like that.
Yeah.
But,
so do you have any particularly fond memories of your time in Hazen? Anything that stands out?
a lot of the ones are with the church and the kind people at the church. The friends that I made at the hospital. I loved my job at the hospital. It was a very positive experience, and got to work in the newborn nursery, 12-hour shifts. They were short on people to work in the nursery and asked me, and that was my first exposure to newborn babies, and which I would later use as a nanny.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. And just having my own house and I don't know. It was a very positive experience going up there, I thought. It made a big difference in our lives, I think.
Yeah. So anyway, now I remember, in those years from 81 to Rick graduated in 84, so and moved to Bismarck to go to college. But I remember those few years that we were in the house together, we continued to fight. He was much better toward you after having lived with David.
Yeah. Made a huge difference.
Yeah. But he and I continued to have a lot of issues.
He took karate and he had to practice on somebody.
Yeah, right? he did do that.
I'll never forget coming home from working the evening shift and coming home from work and walking in and seeing this big hole in my living room wall. Oh my God.
Yeah.
He had tackled you and you went through the wall. And then the night I was working evenings again, and you called me and said, I'm in Washburn and I need a ride home. What the hell are you doing in Washburn? I wanted to drive to Grandma's because Rick was so mean to me. And I got tired in Washburn. I thought, oh my God. What is it, 30 miles to Washburn?
30, 35 miles.
Oh, I couldn't even fathom that you'd ridden your bike there. So the only thing I could do was send Rick to pick you up.
Yeah.
I'd like to have been in the car to see what he had said.
Well, I remember I was waiting. I had gone to somebody's house. There was a little trailer court close by there, and I went to somebody's house and asked if I could use the phone call. And so I called you and told you what I'd done. And then I remember Rick, I think he came with, I don't know if it was Mark or who he came with. But I just remember him getting out of the car and doing this kind of thing with his fist. I'm just like, he was just trying to be funny, of course. But yeah.
And you're thinking, give me my bike, I'll go to Grandma's, huh?
Well, and actually, it wasn't just that I was tired. My bike had actually broke down. I couldn't go any further. So, and it had got dark by then, and I was like, so.
You have a habit of running, don't you?
I was a pretty
adventuresome.
Well, I guess, but I mean, I think I was just a very stressed child. You know what I mean? The stresses that were on my life as I was growing up just drove me to do some extreme things, because I wanted to escape certain situations. And I think even a lot of the rebellion I did during my teen years, the getting in trouble and the people I hung around with and stuff.
Trying to remember, weren't you involved with a kid that went to the airport and did some damage?
Yeah.
Memory just came back to me, and I thought, you almost got in trouble with the law there, didn't you?
Oh, I did. I mean, I ended up getting
How did you get out of that?
Well, what happened was, and my friend's name was Calvin.
Yeah.
And I'd been friends with him for a while, and him and I cooked up this plan to get somebody to buy us some beer. And so we pulled that off. We got a case of beer, and I told you I wanted to go spend the night at his house. You didn't know no better, so you let me go. And we actually we couldn't ask anybody for a ride out to his house because we were lugging a case of beer in a suitcase. So, and he lived a couple miles out of town, and so we had this suitcase full of beer, and we walked to his place, lugging this suitcase of beer. And so we get out there, and we're up half the night playing quarters, drinking, and middle of the night he tells me, I got some traps set down by the creek. I need to go see if there's any animals caught in
the middle of the night?
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, and on our way out the door, he grabs a gun and says, if there's anything in the trap, I got to shoot it, so I got to bring a gun. All right, whatever. I'm drunk. I don't really care. And so we go walking, and it was a long walk. I mean, it's probably a mile or two just to get to where the airport was. And on our way up to the airport, he says to me, I forgot to bring flashlight. It's going to be hard to see down there. So we're passing through this airport, and this airport has an open hangar where these single-engine planes or whatever are sitting in there. And he starts looking in these planes. And next thing I know, he says, hey, there's a couple flashlights in this plane. So he takes a step back and draws his gun and shoots a hole through the window of the plane and gets in there and grabs these flashlights.
What did you do?
I was just like, what are you doing? But the only thing I remember about that, and again, I was drunk, so it's a little hard to tell, but I mean, I just remember feeling like this guy's nuts, and he's shooting things, and I'm not saying nothing, because the cops asked me later on, why didn't you run away? And I
might have got shot.
Yeah. And so we go from there out to the creek where his traps are, and there wasn't anything in the traps. So we come walking back, and on the way back, we got to pass by this airport again. Well, there was this little metal building there with big windows in it, and there was a Coke machine inside the little metal building. And so he decides to shoot his way into that little metal building because it was locked. And he gets in there, puts some slugs into the Coke machine, gets that open, takes all the money out of it, takes a bunch of pop. And again, I just remember being really scared.
Yeah.
And we ran back to his house. I was so afraid. And, we ran back to his house and went to bed. And the next morning, the thing was, you were picking, it was a Saturday, so you were picking me up the next morning to take me to church. So, you come out the next morning, you pick me up, we go to church out in Stanton. And we always went for Sunday school and church. So, and I remember going to Sunday school, and as I'm upstairs from Sunday school, Pastor Combach, Gary, he stops me and he tells me how proud he is of me because I'm such a good example as a Christian young person.
No, boy.
And, I'm thinking about what just went on the night before. And, but the thing was, some time passed, and I wasn't saying nothing about what happened out there, but I started noticing that people around school started coming up to me and saying, hey, I heard that you and Kelvin were the ones who shot the stuff up out there at the airport. I'm like, what? I'm denying everything, But I start wondering, okay, how do these people know this? And so, I assume he must have started bragging about it and telling people or something. So anyway, the cops end up coming to our door one day and asking me about it, and And again, I just denied everything. And sometime later, they come back again and talk to me again, and they say, well, you know, we're hearing a lot more about this, and we recovered the shells, we examined the shells, and we know they came from Calvin's gun. So we're going to ask you one more time, do you know anything about this? And they even told me they'd like to put me on a lie detector, you know. And I didn't know nothing back then about that not being admissible in court. So I was just like, all right, I guess I better spill. So I sit down with the cop and I tell him everything.
What were you, 14, 15?
I think I was 15.
Okay,
Yeah.
That would be pretty scary for a 15.
Yeah, and so I tell the cop everything that happened, you know, that night. And I was completely honest. I told him that we'd been drinking and everything else. And, you know, that I was just there. You know, I hadn't actually done anything. But, you know, I end up finding out that we were both being charged. I was being charged as an accomplice. So we had to go to court. And we went to court, and they had us go see the judge separately, but I'm getting ahead of myself here because this is an important part. I remember going to you and talking to you about this and saying, you know, I was there, I did what I did, but I didn't do the stuff to the planes or the pop machine. I didn't do any of that stuff. And I'm like, you know, obviously I was real scared, and I was like, you know, what do I do? They want to charge me with this crime, and all I did was be there. And they weren't even charging me with being drunk as a minor. It's like they weren't even worried about that.
They're buying it.
You know, destruction of aircraft is a federal offense. They were going for the big fish, you know. So, and I remember you saying, well, I think we should invite Pastor over for dinner and talk to him about it and see what he says. Mm. So that's what we did. We had Pastor come over for dinner, and I told him the whole story. And I remember him telling me, okay, if you're telling me the truth, God knows you're telling me the truth. So we're going to pray, and we're going to leave it in God's hands. So that's what we did. And we went to court, and like I say, they took us in to see the judge separately. The officer was there. I have no idea what Calvin told him. I went in and told the same story I'd told all along, which was what happened. And so sometime later, I get word that they had dropped all charges against me and, you know, convicted him.
Oh, wow.
And
that's impressionable on you.
It was. It made a huge impression on me, you know, because the thing was, from the time I was 8 years old when I first said that sinner's prayer till that moment when I was probably 15, you know, I was a Christian, but I was a Christian kind of nominally. You know, it was like I would say, hey, I've been born again, you know, all that stuff, you know. So I didn't worry about whether I was saved, but I wasn't really living it, you know. Mm-hmm. It hadn't made an impact on me in my heart, really, you know, to where I really felt like I had that personal connection with God. But when all this came down, and I just figured I was on my way to reform school, you know, and I just pretty much assumed that, and so when and I had no reason to think that Calvin would tell them the truth, because he'd been telling everybody at school that it was me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And
you don't own a gun.
No, but it was my idea. See.
Oh.
Yeah. So you know, and I don't know. I mean, he could have went in there and told them the truth, but I don't know. I have no idea what he did. But for whatever reason, we left this in God's hands, and it turned out to my favor, you know. And in that moment, it was like, wow, you know, this really works. God's really got my back. He's really watching out for me here, because I did not expect this to go in my favor. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would call that coincidence.
Oh,
But
quite
not me.
coincidence.
I couldn't chalk that up to coincidence.
No.
And so, that for me personally is what radically changed me from just being this nominal kind of Christian to really going, from pretty much from that moment on, I started reading my Bible every night. I started praying every night. And, within a couple years' time, I went from being this rebellious kid who would stay out all night and not tell you where I was at, smoking dope, getting drunk, smoking cigarettes, running around with all the wrong people. I did a lot of rotten stuff. I remember, and it's funny because I remember some of the stuff I did, going home and praying, oh God, please forgive me. But that's what changed it. Because from that moment on, I need to be real, and all that changed for me then within a couple of years after that. So.
You said you recommitted your life when you were 16.
Well, yeah, I was 15, 16, whenever that happened there. That I figure, 16, it was probably 16 when I really, because I was still, I quit school when I was 16. But I was still in a fairly rebellious place, obviously, because I quit school and all that. But somewhere in that neighborhood was when I really started changing. And I really own it up to starting to get into the Bible and starting to pray daily.
Well, you told me that Dr. Seitz had an influence on you too. When you broke your foot.
Well, that inspired me to lose weight. I lost a lot of weight after that happened. But,
Oh, I didn't mean spiritually. I just meant, in your life, it made a difference.
Yeah. But so that was that. Anyway, I guess to try and get back on track. So Rick and I were still fighting. He finally, he graduates and he goes off to college, and I was very happy about that because I felt I was finally going to have peace in my life. And but yeah, it's kind of it didn't matter because even after he left, I made my own troubles, until this happened. And I don't even know if you remember some of the stuff that I did, the staying out all night, not telling you where I was. And in fact, I remember doing that, and I remember coming home the next day, and you were so mad at me, and you took a swing at me.
Really?
And I grabbed your hand and wouldn't let you hit me. That got you even madder.
I don't remember at all your staying out nights.
Yeah. And so I was just, I was in a terribly rebellious place before all that happened,
Well, I remember you're laying on your waterbed with having nunchucks in your room so that you could defend yourself, and how terribly depressed and miserable you were.
Yeah. Oh yeah, summer of probably summer of 1982. I remember spending most of that summer closed up in my room and hardly even coming out because I just was so miserable.
You told me you had suicidal thoughts or something. It really freaked me out.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's the time in Hazen. Let's talk about.
Well, you moved to Bismarck.
I moved to Bismarck, yeah, because I quit school, and that was so I quit school in '85. I'd been working for David in the pizza place till '84. He closed the pizza place in '84, And then I was helping him. He was building a food truck, and he was doing little, like, he was cooking pigs on a big rotisserie thing, and doing like street fairs and stuff like that. And so I was helping him with stuff like that for a while. And then he decided he wanted to go down to Bismarck to look for work. And so I asked if I could go with him. And I asked Grandma if I could come stay there, because he was going to go stay there for a while. So him and I both went down to Bismarck and looked for work. And so yeah, by 1985 you had us both out of the house. And so do you remember anything about that? Well, us after we were both gone?
No, just working and being involved in church and you know, being involved with the people at work and making sauerkraut in a crock and making choke cherry wine and things like that. But I think that was all before you guys left that I made those things. But yeah, I think after living 2 years in that house alone, when Mom called in 1987 and said, I can't do this alone anymore, because she was taking care of Dad and his Alzheimer's, and it was getting really hard. She said, I can't do it alone anymore. And I said, I'll let my house go back and come help. And so that's what I did. I quit my job and let the house go back to FHA. Moved down with her. And I knew that I had to work to make money, so I decided to be a nanny. And after working in the nursery at the hospital in Hazen, I wanted to be a nanny. And so I was able to find a job with Dr. Hughes and his wife and their 18-month-old little girl. And went home at night and helped Mom with Dad. And so that was 1987 when I made that move. You were 18 by then, and Ricky, I think, went to Minneapolis to further his education.
So how did that go, moving in with Grandma?
Fine. Yeah, it was very needed.
Yeah. One of the things that David and I did after we moved down and lived with Grandma for a while, well, David lived there for a while, I lived there for a long time. But one of the things we did was finish what had been the storeroom in the basement and turned it into a bedroom, because David wanted his own room. So we really did it for him. But after he moved out, that was available, and you moved in there after you came down. So anyway, so let's deal with this a little bit. When you came back to Bismarck in '87, and by this time you had seen how the Alzheimer's disease had affected your father over quite a period of time. And I remember you telling me once, a long time ago, that you felt that what the Alzheimer's disease did to him made you change the way you saw him.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? And do you remember why you
so.
felt that way?
I think so. Made him very dependent, on others, not the strong, person that he always was, very stubborn and he was right about everything through his whole life, and he was dependent on us, and we were his caregivers. It changes your whole perspective about a person when they get to be like a child, I guess.
Yeah.
Couldn't really communicate, and he'd get angry and frustrated and squeeze our hands real tight, because he'd get so angry, and it was hard, really hard.
Now, because your relationship with him had been difficult over the years, do you feel like going through that period of being a caregiver for him in the later years of his life, or the end years of his life, do you feel like any kind of healing or closure came from it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I gave the eulogy at his funeral, which probably nobody would have ever expected. The type of turbulent relationship we had all our life. But, when I think back to things that I talked to Aunt Johanna about, his sister, and how he was his mother's favorite out of all the 4 boys, and how his sister Johanna, his mother, was so physically abusive to her. And I think back to him growing up with a strong mother like that, somebody that was very critical and very abusive to her daughter anyway. I don't know about how she abused the other boys, but I was told that he was her favorite. But when I know I was the apple of his eye, being his only daughter and everything, although he wasn't a fatherly type that spent a lot of time with his kids. But my getting pregnant and having to get married, I think, blew him to bits. I think that really put him on I don't know if he had an anger toward me or what, but nothing I did the rest of my life ever was right. And I struggled and worked and tried so hard to please him, and nothing pleased him. And so, yeah, it was a healing relationship, definitely. So that by the time 1991 came and he died, I was able to give the eulogy at his funeral. That shows a big change, I think. Was that ever recorded, Dad's funeral?
Not by me. I don't know, unless the church recorded it. I don't know. But
I don't remember anything I said. But
so do you feel so coming back and spending those years living with Grandma, helping take care of Grandpa, do you feel like that did anything for your relationship with your mother? Did it stay the same? Did it improve? Did you guys grow closer? I mean,
that's a good question. I don't know. She was always, she wasn't a compassionate, emotional type person. But I suppose living together that many years, I mean, we'd have grown closer. But by the time, 1987 to 90, I don't think it would have made any difference because we weren't living together that many years before he died. I don't think it would have changed much. But I'm thinking about it changed before she died. In the next, 11 years I think she lived. After he died, something like that. 10 or 11 years. But I lived with her for a lot of years.
yeah. So, okay, you came back to Bismarck from Hazen. You mentioned that you became a nanny. So tell us about that experience a little bit. What was it, your first experience with being a nanny?
I loved it. I loved everything about it, especially the family that the Lord had put me with. I mean, they just took me in just like I was a member of their family, and I did their laundry and their cooking, and they loved everything I cooked, and the children loved me. They had another baby later, and it was just, yeah, I felt like a member of their family. We went on trips together to California and stuff, and it was a very positive experience.
Okay. Now, from the time when you became a Christian in '77 through all these years now, and well, we're up to late '80s here
Trying
anyway.
to remember where I was going to church and when I moved back.
Well, if I remember right, when you came back, I was attending New Song, the Foursquare Church.
Oh,
And
yeah, I
you-
went to New Song,
Yeah,
1987,
so,
that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, so I think you
Okay,
started coming
yeah,
back.
I went there for
Yeah.
good 15 years.
So for anyway, 77 to 87 here, we got about a decade period here where you didn't date. And how content were you with single life during that time?
From 77 to 87?
Yeah.
I think I was content.
I mean, like when in '77, when you got involved with the Reformed Church and you started going to the Christian Singles group, were you hoping to find a husband at that time by doing that? Or what was your... No.
No, I just wanted Christian fellowship.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose every single person thinks that in the back of their mind, but I was just so gung-ho on the Lord at that time. I just wanted to be around as many Christians as possible and do fun, wholesome things and not go to the bars, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very blissful time for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, I think, let's see, 87. I think when I lived with Boone, when I took that job with Boone in 93 to 97, that was probably when I really, really desired to have a man in my life, because he was everything I would have ever wanted. And that didn't work. But yeah, I was pretty happy otherwise before then. Between working and helping with Dad, I mean, that was a very stressful, busy time.
Mm. All right. So how many years did you work the first nanny job for the Hugheses?
3.
3 years? Okay. So...
And they were the ones who found me the job with Stacy and Larry Johnson.
Okay.
Because he was the editor of the Bismarck Tribune and she was a reporter. And they gave me a car when I left. Jim and Beth did.
Yeah, the little Toyota wagon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the car that I carted the kids around in, and so they just gave it to me. That was very generous. And so I worked for Stacy and Larry. I went to work. Well, starting out, I went to interview with them. Their baby was born in May, and I went to interview with them about that time. And I always, when I took a job, shared my testimony and how I had given my life to the Lord and how I live as a Christian, etc., so that they would know what type of person their baby's being exposed to. And I remember during the interview Larry saying to me, "I did that when I was a child." And his wife looked at him and said, "You did?" Because she was Catholic and he was going to church with her, and I don't think there was a whole lot of church going anyway, but so they knew where I came from. And I started on July 19th, and that was the day that he was diagnosed with colon cancer. and the baby was just a couple months old. And 2 months later, Larry died. And he had stayed home because he was taking chemo, and he was so very sick. He was throwing up and stuff, and I'd be taking care of the baby downstairs, and he'd be so sick upstairs, and so they ended up flying him to Mayo to see if they could do anything for him. And I got a call from her, and she said, we're on our way back on the plane, and Larry wanted to be home to die. They told him he was going to die and that he wanted to come home. So we're flying on our way, and I want you to be at the house for the baby when I get there. And so I went to the house, and she came in and said that he had passed away on the plane and that he was in such horrible pain. He was just screaming from pain on the plane, and the baby was screaming, and it was just such a horribly emotional time. And so I took care of the baby and took care of her for a year after that. And she was so angry with God. We had so many deep conversations. She'd come home from work and we'd talk, and she was so angry with God for taking Larry and leaving her along with that new baby. And so it was a very emotionally stressful time. And I just shared with her about the Lord as much as I could, and she didn't want to hear too much of it, but that's all I knew to do. So, but then there was a guy at her office by the name of Bob Bush, a good Catholic man from a good Catholic family, and she met him about 6 months after Larry died, and they started sleeping together. I would come to work in the morning, and they would come down from the bedroom. I loved Larry. Just the 2 months that I was there with him before he died, I just thought he was the most wonderful man, and I thought, you can't be serious. You're, shacking up with this guy. And so I told her I had to leave her employment. I couldn't stay there and work like that. So we parted friendly. It was okay. But it's hard to come when a baby's new like that and get attached to them and have to leave when they're a year old. But they did end up getting married. She certainly wasn't over her first husband. I don't know how she dealt with getting married so fast, but who knows if that marriage lasted.
Yeah.
But that's when Dad died. Right after that happened. And I think that's when Stan Green died too, about that time.
Oh, yeah.
That same
Probably
summer
would've
when
been,
he drowned in the river.
Yeah.
And then Dad died, and I decided after that it's time to get out of Dodge. So I advertised. No, I didn't advertise. I saw an ad in the paper from Monica Ward. I almost forgot her last name. It's because it's changed, because she's remarried. But yeah, I saw an ad in the paper for a Midwest lady to be nanny for her 3 little boys in Sterling, Virginia, 35 miles out of D.C. And I decided to take it so I could get out of town and go away. So that's a good spot to stop.
Okay, yeah, we're...
Start in 1991 on the way to D.C.
Okay, yep. Yeah, we're kind of running low on battery anyway, so that's a good place to stop.
Well, I think we've been doing it for about an hour and a half now.
Yeah, at least a little bit more, actually, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll stop there and pick it up next time.